You went on record saying that there has been a status quo agreement on the on the West Philippine Sea during the time of President Duterte. There's nothing secret about this. I think we were looking at the previous 2017 Reuters report, which said as much that there was a agreement. Okay. What we'd like to know, Mr. Secretary, is was there a promise to quote unquote tow away BRP Sierra Madre?
No, because that is not status quo.
Right. Okay.
The status quo is that Ayungan is already, that Sierra Madre is already in Ayungin, because it was sunk there by the administration of Espada. So what we mean by status quo is that Sierra Madre is there, and that the Chinese and the Philippine side will not make any improvements on any of the geographic features found in the disputed areas of the West Philippine Sea.
So, okay, that's clear, Mr. Secretary. But then again, China, in its recent post by the embassy here in Manila, is saying that there was an agreement to tow away. We'd just like to know, Mr. Secretary...
A promise, yeah.
A promise to throw away, to tow away. So we'd just like to know, Mr. Secretary, if they're referring to an agreement that was made prior to the Duterte administration?
I can unequivocally say that no such agreement was entered into by President Duterte, although I think the Chinese are alluding to an agreement made by an earlier president, but not Duterte.
Okay. That's
before
clear.
the Duterte.
We may be conflating kasi the two things. Ano? A status quo agreement which says there will be no further movements or enhancements or buildings at Subi Reef by the Chinese or in Ayungin by the Philippine government. So that's clear. Pero itong towing away the BRP Sierra Madre is a totally different matter.
Yes. In fact, that would be to contradict the status quo. No? That would be a contradiction or violation of the agreement. No? And the agreement was not just in Ayungin. It was for the entire disputed area of the West Philippine Sea. And this was made publicly. No? This has been publicly announced repeatedly by then Secretary Alan Peter Cayetano.
Okay. Because as a reaction to your pronouncements or your statements, Secretary Roque, no, National Security Assistant Director General Jonathan Malaya says that parang he's a bit confused because while you confirmed this agreement, there has been a previous denial by former Executive Secretary Medjel Dea that there was any such agreement to tow away. So really, magkaibang usapan po to.
Yes, and I think Yusek Malaya must be confused, no? Because an agreement to tow away is not the same as observance of status quo. Status quo, as you go back to the internet and look at the pronouncement of Secretary Cayetano, was really for either side not to make any further improvements in any of the geographic features that are disputed.
As a member, Secretary of the former Duterte administration, are you aware or privy to information that there was an agreement by a previous administration to tow away BRP Sierra Madre?
Not at all. In fact, there was a water cannon incident also involving Ayungin because there was a resupply ship that was subjected to water cannon. No? And when the president summoned the Chinese ambassador, he expressed his anger and said that just make sure not a single soldier of mine is killed, because if one soldier is killed, that would be a different topic altogether. You know? But there was no mention at all in that meeting that the Philippines ever committed to tow away Sierra Madre. No? So I recall being present in that meeting, and there was no agreement. There was absolutely nothing mentioned by President Duterte that the Sierra Madre would be towed away.
Attorney Roque, would you know the former president's stand on the BRP Sierra Madre being fortified? Di naman being developed, but being fortified kasi bulok-bulok na daw eh. Puro kalawang na.
Well, ever since naman, bulok-bulok naman talaga yan eh, no? Kaya nga sinig natin dyan, bulok-bulok na yan eh, no? So, it has always been a derelict ship there, no? And I remember that in the water cannon incident, the Chinese were complaining precisely that there were repair materials being brought in, no? But what I do know is that the Chinese reiterated, no, that they will never stop the delivery of food and water to the crew of Sierra Madre. And for as long as it was limited to food and water, there was no problem, and there was a relatively more harmonious relationship between the Philippines and China.
Okay,
And
granted.
can I repeat that, Attorney Roque? There was an agreement for the Chinese never to stop the resupply missions to BRP Sierra Madre.
Yes, because they know that if they stop the delivery of food and water, they would be responsible for the death of soldiers in Ayungin.
Okay.
But what they were complaining of was they resorted to the one cannon incident that happened during the Duterte administration in the area because they claimed they were carrying construction materials and repair materials.
Okay. Secretary, repairs, is that a violation of a status quo agreement? Kung repair lang naman?
I do not, well, I think the Chinese are literally construing status quo as status quo, that everything is left as is. No? And that must be the construction of status quo.
Pero, sorry kung kailangan ko ulit-ulitin na Attorney Harry, kasi dun sa nilabas na statement ng Chinese spokesperson at saka ng embassy dito sa Manila, nakalista talaga dun na sila ay na-offend na hindi pa natin tinatanggal yung Sierra Madre doon sa Bahura.
Kung hindi galing sa inyo yung assurance na yon, kung hindi galing sa Duterte administration, saan kaya galing yon?
Yeah.
Secretary Roque?
Then we need to ask the prior administration. There were the administrations of Aquino, Arroyo, and Estrada. It must be under their administration, but certainly not under Duterte.
Okay. Ami?
Yes. Attorney, would you know, I'm sure you've been talking to the former president. Does he have any opinion? Have you discussed what's happening now in the West Philippine Sea, and what does he think about what's happening now? Kasi marami ng insidente in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Well, the president's attitude is he is no longer president. And whatever is happening now is the business of the current president. No, he did what he could to promote better relations with China, and I would dare say he was successful. No, so it's up to this administration now to come up with its own foreign policy direction, to promote a more harmonious relation.
Okay, Secretary Roque, I understand that a few months back you were in China for some conference. We'd just like to know, Mr. Secretary, what is the view from Beijing on this matter? How do they see this conflict? And I guess my second question is, what is your position when it comes to what we're looking at, this increasing frequency of the, let's call it, scrapes between the Philippines and China on these resupply missions?
This is now my personal view.
Okay.
And my personal view is that I think the policy of the PBBM administration is really to increase tension between the Philippines and China so that the Philippines can invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty and could get the United States involved in the current standoff. No? And my view is this is a misplaced view because, number one, America is already busy in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And number two, President Biden, in a recent speech, identified the areas of priorities in Asia, and there was no mention of the Philippines or the West Philippine Sea. And number three, in the recent summit between Biden and President Xi in San Francisco, it's very clear that the United States is now promoting better relations with China. And therefore, my conclusion is it is wrong for BBM administration to assume that under the current situation, even if there's increased tension in the West Philippine Sea, that the United States would be militarily involved pursuant to the Mutual Defense Treaty.
How should we respond, Mr. Secretary, in view of the water cannoning of these resupply missions?
Well, obviously, go back to why they are resorting to water cannoning. And again, historically, they resorted to water cannoning if they bring in construction materials or repair materials to Ayungin. No? But as I said, when it was limited to food and water, there was no controversy and they would not stop the delivery.
But wouldn't that be tantamount to letting BRP Sierra Madre wither away or
collapse into the sea?
Yeah, collapse into the sea?
Well, I suppose that would be the end result, but the PBM administration has to answer what kind of diplomatic relations does it want with China. Does it want this vessel to be the reason for complete cutoff of diplomatic relations, or even the beginning of the use of force between the Philippines and China? Or would it want to go back to the situation before, where we could push forward with matters that we could in fact pursue even if we have not resolved the territorial dispute with China, including the issue of increased trade, increased capital investments, and increased tourism between the Philippines and China.
Mr. Secretary, I mentioned a while ago that you were in Beijing a few months back, for some conference or related to this matter. So can you tell us, what is the view from Beijing?
The view in Beijing is that the Philippines has become belligerent, and it's really provoking China into an open confrontation. And that is now very evident in the write-up about the Philippines. Now, I saw at least 2 English language newspapers in China, and that was basically the tenor of the news reports, that the Philippines is now provoking China into a war. And it is doing this because they want also to involve the United States in the controversy, because they know about the existence of the Mutual Defense Treaty. That's the view from China.
Okay, don't they see the military position of the Philippines as very weak? Why would they classify it as a provocation? How can a weaker country provoke?
Precisely, the provocation is because they know about the Mutual Defense Treaty. So they are anticipating that while the Philippines cannot possibly engage China in a shooting war, the Philippines believes that the U.S. can engage China in such a shooting war.